Welcome back, dear friends. Now we are entering in. Welcome back, dear friends. Now we are entering into the third session of this seminar. Before having the presentation, we will have the tutorial for those who feel the difficulty in joining the WhatsApp group. So as you enter WhatsApp, go to the settings where you will have this option to scan and then click join group. So, and also I hope this WhatsApp group link is circulated in the class groups. So you can use that link also to join. So please join as soon as possible to raise questions there and your comments. Okay, now we move on to the presentations. Now we have 3 presentations. I invite Sam Brimmer to chair this session. Over to you, Sam.
A warm good morning to you all. Let me directly get down to business. This session has 3 paper presentation. Each presentation will have 20 minutes. At the end of 19 minutes, there will be a warning bell. After the completion of the 3 presentation, the floor will be open for discussion. With this note, let me introduce the title of the first presentation, The Science and Philosophy of Transgenders, which is presented by Brother Nirmal Savio Paul and Brother Sakaya Ravi. Both are pursuing their second year philosophy in Jnanadipa. Without further ado, I cordially welcome Brother Nirmal Savio Paul to present his paper. Over to you, brother.
Respected Reverend Fathers, Reverend Sisters, religious from various houses, my dear brother seminarians and lay friends, a very good morning to all of you. Our presentation is going to explore the philosophical concepts that undergird the transgender narrative and the various nuances of the scientific issues that are closely intertwined with the transgender narrative. Therefore, our presentation is divided into these 3 self-explanatory stages. Let's jump into the philosophical section. The basic foundational issue that undergirds the transgender phenomenon is what is gender. Traditionally, gender has been understood as something essentialist. You're a man because you're a man, and you're a woman because you're a woman. This was then replaced by Judith Butler's performative view of gender. Gender is a performance. Without an actual performer, by the way, that is created an interaction between the individual and the society. This too was felt to be too much normative, and so transgenders found that an innate sense of their gender was a better explanation of their subjective experience than the performative view of gender. But even when you look at the epistemological question here, how do you identify this innate sense of gender? It finally comes down to the admission that it is something constructed and not identified. As a result, there is a wide variety of metaphysical views of gender among the transgenders, but all of them are unanimous in rejecting the essentialist view of gender. So this is an issue that needs to be ironed out among them. The transgender narrative has its roots in postmodernism. Affirmation is considered the primary and ideal way to deal with someone's expression of their transgender identity. Now, this is directly rooted in postmodern metaphysics, where volition is seen as the root of metaphysics in many places. People are what they claim to be, irrespective of what evidence you have at hand. Therefore, the language of transgenderism is essentially ontological. However, many transgenders do not wish to debate the transgender phenomenon at the metaphysical level, would rather present it as a medical or a scientific claim. Post-structuralism applied to gender and sex after the third wave feminism gave rise to the idea of gender as performance. And since this replaced the essentialist view of gender, performance needs a perceiver, and therefore it is very important to them how they are perceived. That is why, for the transgender community, the language with which they describe themselves and the language by which they wish others to describe themselves is very important. Here you can see a list of a few significant critical theorists whose ideas have been foundational in constructing the transgender narrative. Ethics is a very thorny issue in the transgender phenomenon. These days, many of who come out as transgender and transition are not middle-aged, but teenagers and even children. Society does not allow them to drive, to consume alcohol, or to marry, but they are able to undergo completely life and identity altering gender affirmation surgery. So there is a question of whether they are at an age where they can give informed consent, and this question is still an ongoing debate which has not been fully answered. Is affirmation the only possible response to a transgender's identity? There has been some pushback from the medical community and the psychological community on this. They say that affirmation should be seen as only one of a wide variety of responses. Considering affirmative to be normative is not something that has consensus in the medical community, is what they say. So that is also an ongoing debate. Another important issue is whether trans sportspersons can be allowed to compete as women in women's sports, because there have been many cases of mediocre sportsperson who were at a mediocre level or a very poor level when they were men, but when they transitioned to women, they became they started breaking records and they became top performers in their field. So obviously women feel that this threatens their space. Well, Michel Foucault said, what you legislate, you help to create. This gives us a clue on why, for transgenders, the legislation is something very important to them. And you can see this in the fact that the laws that have been created by the efforts of transgender lobbies have their philosophical foundation very clearly ingrained into them. For in their laws, in the language of the laws, we can see that gender identity precedes sex. They consider that current laws are too binary or too restrictive for them. That is another reason for them to impose their view of language on everyone. These transgender advocacy organizations typically are not for debate. They have a no debate policy. The way they function is to convince governments and organizations to implement transgender affirmative regulations, as you can see in an example from a university document. Next, epistemological. Like we saw, perception is very important for transgenders. Traditionally, people were supposed to have a self, but for the transgender, the self is replaced by a gender identity. Gender identity is something constructed with words, and so it's also vulnerable to being destroyed by words. Finally, the stifling of debate by certain transgender advocacy organizations has raised concerns in the political sphere. And another thing is, are many of the politicians who support transgenders really sincere? Or are they just doing it to gain political brownie points? Because this is a hot button issue. So by just claiming to support them, they can advance their career. The traditional forms of politics, left versus right, does not have much significance these days. Even in India, we see many people say that whether it is Congress or BJP, it's all the same thing underneath. The locus of politics has shifted from class struggle to identity struggle. And some politicians are smart enough to understand that. So they jump on the bandwagon. So you cannot be sure that a politician who supports the transgender community really cares for them as human beings. Traditionally, Marxists have been a bit anti-transgender because they think that the transgender appeal to an innate sense of gender is anti-materialist. But recently, it was discovered by Marxist scholarship that the ideological heirs of Marx, like the Frankfurt School and Antonio Gramsci, pushed for various kinds of identity politics, which included gender identity politics. And as a result, Marxists are now able to see transgenders as part of as an outgrowth of Marxism. Next, scientific studies. I would like to begin with this quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson, where he says, transgenderism is a phenomenon in society. So that is real. You have to deal with it. All you have to now decide is under which science will you study it, biology or sociology or something else. There is a problem that needs to be pointed out in the scientific studies related to transgenderism. That is the methodology. Since it is a budding field, and since it deals with 1% of the population, and since there is a lot of deviancy among the individuals in that group, it is difficult to get statistically significant data, and it is very easy to question the methodology or the statistical findings of the studies. One example of that is this book, The Illusions of Gender. That book, written by a trans activist, the whole book simply consists of taking up various studies which were treated as conventional and which were treated as foundational in the field of gender, and debunking them by looking at the statistical method, their statistical approach, their methodology, or the assumptions which were not questioned so far. Since this kind of questioning is going on, people from either side of the debate can claim that the research supports their view. So the scientific basis of transgenderism is still a field in flux, and we will have to wait a little bit for the dust to settle in order to say things that are conclusive. But that being the case, that said, we can still look at a few issues. There have been, the first main issue is, of course, is there a biological basis for transgenderism? There have been certain discoveries in genetics that show that pathways in the brain related to male sex hormones or female sex hormones have been identified statistically among transgenders, which means that there is some genetic foundation to transgenderism. But this raises an important question. If there is a genetic foundation to transgenderism, then does it not mean that there is something essential to what is a transgender? Likewise, neuroscience. One view of looking at a transgender is a person with a male brain in a female body, or a person with a female brain in a male body. The fetus at the initial stage of conception is undifferentiated sexually. There are two stages that you can identify in the development of the fetus, in which there is a spike of testosterone in the uterus. The first spike creates the sex of the body, and the second spike creates the sex of the brain. So it is possible that one of these spikes could be missed, and thus you could end up with a male brain in a female body, or vice versa. So this has implications for sexuality or gender as something that is embodied. Now, there are in the empirical research, there are two understandings of this. One group of people see that they have found out from their studies that the brain of a transgendered person is slanted towards the brain of their desired sex, whereas another study has found that the brain of the transgendered person does not resemble either the male brain or a typical female brain, but has its own individual phenotype, distinct phenotype. So once again, here we see conflicting views in empirical research. This is another very interesting field, epigenetics. Epigenetics deals with how we record our memories in our DNA. As you know, our biological matter refreshes itself every now and then. The cells that we have are decay, and they are recreated. The only thing in our body that stays is the DNA molecules. And everything that we undergo in our life is recorded in the DNA molecules, but not recorded in the genomic sequence. It is recorded in the way that the molecules are knotted. And the study of these knots in the DNA molecules is epigenetics. The way that the molecules are knotted means that certain aspects of the genome will not be able to be read. The genome will be there, but it will not be expressed in your body. So that is, recent studies have strongly indicated that there is an epigenetic basis for transgenderism. You can see that graph. There are two distinct zones for male cisgenders and transgenders. So that is another. So there were questions yesterday about nature versus nurture. That's actually a little bit more complicated. Nature versus nature plus nurture, you could say. That is another issue. Next, puberty blockers are a medicine given to children who express their transgender identity, because if you want to transition as a child, it is much more effectively done if you can stop your puberty. There are two views on this. There is a group which has concluded that puberty blockers are dangerous and untested and cause mental problems for children, but there is also research that says that puberty blockers are perfectly safe, and it is fear mongering to say that puberty blockers are dangerous to children and they should be given to transgender kids because they are the most effective means of them being able to live a happy life. Gender affirmation surgery, the highest level of medical care that can be given to a transgender is gender affirmation surgery. However, there are various issues in this. Like was discussed yesterday, it is mostly external. It does not really produce a total female, whether it is or a total male, whether it is hormone replacement therapy or top surgery or bottom surgery. However, it does give many transgenders a sense of satisfaction and a sense of freedom once they are able to realign their external appearance with their internal sense of identity. However, there is also a group of transgenders that do not find satisfaction in this partial reconstruction, and they choose to detransition. So the question is, what percentage of people detransition? And that there is not much clarity on that. So there are once again conflicting views on this. There are people who point to the detransitioning community and claim that therefore the people should be more careful in recommending surgery. But there is also research that says that with proper screening we can reduce this rate of regret among those who have undergone surgery. Sociologically, the internet is today the public sphere of the modern life, of the modern world. Adulthood was previously a ticket of admission to the public sphere, but today it's not like that. Therefore, the narratives on the internet and the public sphere create a sort of feedback loop which can accelerate the rate of gender dysphoria in society, which is an important thing that is studied in society. And it has been seen that in various periods of history, there have been significant illnesses which have something underneath it, like hysteria in the previous century. Therefore, people ask the question, is there anything underlying the current proliferation of gender dysphoria? And Jung had an interesting answer. He says that since society has become post-Christian and the stabilizing influence of religion has been lost, people are looking to a new he predicted this actually before the transgender movement gained traction. People look to a new kind of stability, and the greatest force of stability now can arise from the opposites of male and female. And therefore he appealed to what he called the hermaphroditic archetype, the archetype that embodies the perfections of the male and the female, which Plato also referred to as the perfect primal man. So it's very interesting to see that he predicted this phenomenon. There is also a small critique that the gains that have been gained in academia and pedagogy with the advances of the feminist movement are now sort of set back by the trans movement, because the importance of socialism has been reduced a bit, and the stereotypes which people manage to discourage people taking up have now counterintuitively been brought back, because previously it was with the advent of the feminist movement, it was becoming acceptable to be a feminine man or to be a tomboy. But now, a feminine man or a tomboy is under suspicion of being suspicion of having gender dysphoria and needs treatment to align their identity with their inner gender, with their real self. Sorry. Okay. So I would like to just briefly touch upon a few future trends. As we saw, the stable concept of a self is now replaced with a construct of gender identity, and this seems to be an accelerating trend in society. And the unfortunate tendency of many trans activist organizations to not opt for debate is has been observed to have a corrosive effect on the basis of a liberal democratic society, which was also pointed out by Kathleen Jenner, who herself is a transgender. And boundaries are very important for human beings. Where I stop is where you begin. So it is very important to know where boundaries are. And the transgender movement, especially the later varieties of the transgender movement, like the trans queer movement, which completely rejects any form of boundary, anything to do with male, or there are many transgenders who are happy to be within the binary, like they are males who want to be females or females who want to be males, but there are many other transgenders who completely reject any concept of a boundary for them and for the whole world. So the complete loss of boundaries is seen as a worrying issue by some feminists who think that this will undermine sex-based rights like female-only spaces. And the Humanist Association of America also published a paper in which they say that to be human is to recognize the givenness and the mortality and the limits of human life. And the trans movement sort of mitigates against this because it has a hubristic view that givenness is not important and it exists to be transcended. Interestingly, in a study in mice, they were able to switch the gender of mice just by activating a gene switch. So it may be possible that in future, gene therapy will replace sex affirmation surgery. Tissue engineering has been so far done for peripheral organs like nose or ears, but recently the scaffolding of the male and female genitalia was constructed by tissue engineering researchers. And as we know, transgenders, even after surgery, are sterile. However, recent advances in uterine transplants have given hope to transgenders that they might be able to, trans woman might be able to get pregnant. Along with the transgender movement, there are also other trans identities that are developing in society, like a transracial identity or a trans age identity. Recently in Finland, a law was proposed which says that a person should be allowed to identify with whatever age they feel innately. You could be 60 and you could identify as being 20 years old. This first person here is Oli London, who is a European but identified as being a Korean and therefore underwent surgery in order to look like a Korean. And now that person has experienced regret and is detransitioning from that. However, transgenders, there is a pushback from the transgender community against this because they feel that this trivializes their struggle. However, people who undergo these kind of experiences, they claim that their struggle is just as valid as the trans struggle. So, in conclusion, I would like to conclude by quoting something from Abigail Schreier, who is a noted author on transgender issues. Transgenders deserve our respect, they deserve compassion, and they have every right to live as they wish, especially in modern society, which may include even them having the right to undergo surgery, undergo medical procedures, being called by the pronoun they wish. All that is perfectly fine, and as a courtesy, we are more than willing to give it to them. However, the unfortunate reality of certain advocacy organizations pushing the envelope does cause certain threats to democracy, and we need to be careful of that if we want to preserve our liberal democratic society. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Sabio, for clearly presenting philosophical nuances and complicated scientific issues underlying transgender phenomenon. Let us move over to the next presentation by Brother Milton Mervyn Raj and Marconi Valong. They both are currently doing their second year philosophy in Jnanadeepa. The title of the paper is Philosophical View of Judith Butler. I request Brother Marconi to occupy the dais to present the paper.
Good morning, everyone. So the topic that I'm going to present today is philosophical views of Judith Butler. Many of us might have heard about Judith Butler, and for the sake of introduction, I would like to introduce to you who is Judith Butler. Judith Butler was born on February 24, 1956. She is an American philosopher and gender theorist. Her work has influenced many fields, including political philosophy, ethics, queer theory, and literary theory. In 1984, she earned a PhD in philosophy from Yale University. She is the author of several books. She started teaching at the University of California, Berkeley in 1993. Her most influential concept is gender performativity. This theory is addressed most directly in the books Gender Trouble, Bodies That Matter, and Undoing Gender. She has, however, written a number of books and articles. Because she is a lesbian or legally non-binary person, we can better understand gender through her philosophical views and perspective. So, according to Judith Butler, our identifications is very uncommon. She claims that gender exists mainly because people behave in certain ways. She expands on her solid base by including philosophy, psychology, and biology. She stresses how these ideas are universally accepted. She urges people to evaluate how gender is viewed in society. So, friends, where is it? I would like to highlight the outline that I'm going to present now. First is gender performative. Second, the surface of the body as a whole. Names have meaning. Number 4, identity in sex is not monolithic. Then number 5, binaries and reinforcing taboos. Intersex people, self-definition, and why we talk about gender at all. And lastly, the conclusion. Okay, so through her inquiry into identity, Judith Butler concludes that gender is performative. In her groundbreaking book, Gender Trouble, Judith Butler made the groundbreaking claim that identity is performativity constituted. This idea was in direct opposition to the conventional notion that genders are fixed categories and was in line with the deconstructive ethos. According to Butler, gender is a social role that people perform to adopt that is acknowledged and accepted by the larger community. Butler contends that because gender is a continuous performance that changes with each performance or citation, depending on the context in which it occurs, it defies fixities and universalities. Butler argues that gender has different meaning depending on the cultural framework within which it is performed. Butler sees gender as temporary, mutable, contingent, and perform. Therefore, she rejects absolutes. Now, Butler defines the body as more than an inanimate object or a blank page that takes on cultural connotations. It is instead the result of cultural connotations. Butler has no anatomically defined definitive sex. Sex, like gender, is a culturally constructed term naturalized by the discursive power that creates it. Aid in clarifying this concept. Herculine Barbin, for example, is an intersex person. Butler's case is also supported by the claim that 10% of people have a combination of chromosomal and anatomical characteristics that do not correspond to conventional notions of male or female. The manufactured nature of the male and female sex categories is demonstrated by including those whose bodies are on the outskirts of what is culturally understandable and legitimate. Butler defines the body as a surface whose permeability is politically regulated, as well as signifying practice within a cultural field of gender hierarchy and required heterosexuality. On the surface, their fabrication and performance of the illusion of internal essence, including gendered identity, occurs. Now, Butler's main point in the book, Bodies That Matter, is that sex is neither innate or voluntary. Rather, she sees it as an ongoing process in which regulatory norms that seeks to prohibit taboos like homosexuality and incest create subjects like man or woman. Butler upholds heterosexual hegemony by sexing subjects through the heteronormative lens. In the book, The Body That Matters, it focuses on the symbolic or area of human-generated symbolic representation for things and ideas, in this case, frequently through language. This symbolic area includes naming as a component. Names, according to Butler, are both powerful and problematic. Butler believes that names are a place where the masculine norm as a referent is maintained. Again, in the book Bodies That Matter, Butler challenges preconceived ideas about sex that are centered on the heterosexual norm. She discovers that sex is an identity that derives from other factors, including class and race. Butler believes that just as race and class can be established via sex, so can sex itself. Therefore, human subjects cannot be reduced to a single identity that exists in a vacuum. Because of the profound interdependence of so many variables, attempts to define specific identities are problematic in the presence of such plurality. Now, Butler would also explore the problems with binary gender categories throughout the work. Despite the fact that there are only two broad gender categories, people do exist outside of them. Society would rather ignore the fact that gender is more of a spectrum. Butler discusses how having two options sometimes mean that one supports the other, instead of accepting that there are more than two ways to express gender identity. Therefore, there is a conflict, and violence stems from a genuine need to preserve the order of binary gender. Butler would include intersex people who are defined as people who are born or later acquire physical characteristics that differ from the conventional standards of being male or female. She claims that because so many intersex people have suffered as a result of being forced into one of the two genders that many societies accept, this community of intersex believe that gender should be determined through assignment or choice, but not through coercion or force. So therefore, Butler wants people to be free, to be themselves, to be recognized, but she also recognizes that this is difficult given has drawn criticism from all across the world. In the article that came in The Guardian, named "Why is the concept of gender causing controversy around the world?" In this article, Judith Butler illustrates the expanding global attacks on gender ideology. She notes that some organizations, and she says, concurred that the traditional family is under attack, that students are being brainwashed to become homosexuals in the classroom, and that gender is dangerous. if not diabolical. Ideology threatening to destroy families, local cultures, civilization, and even man himself. But the truth remains that gender research is difficult and calls for a diverse group of academics. She does not reject sex in her idea about gender, but instead places emphasis on how it is established. Therefore, in actuality, she would argue how science and law come into social management of identity rather than being against science. She also investigates the binary gender categories and how the two possibilities can lead to conflict and violence. Again, in her book named Undoing Gender, she claims that although gender is a continuum, but people would choose to ignore it. Again, I would mention about the intersex people. She uses the pain of intersex persons who are obliged to identify with one of the two genders that society has recognized and accepted as their own example. And she goes on to say that people's opposition to the idea of genders having more than two stems from the fact that gender norms serve as the foundation of the family with two parents, one male and one female, being the norm. So beyond this is not an option, because doing so would undermine the existing core that we already have. So I would like to bring one of the interviews with Liz Coates. She is an American writer, art critic, curator, and art historian based in Los Angeles. In one of the interviews with Judith Butler complains that people have even misread her book, Gender Trouble. And this is what she says, and this is what she complains. She says, the bad reading goes something like this. I can get up in the morning, look in my closet, and decide which gender I want to be. I can take out a piece of clothing and change my gender, stylish it, and then that evening I can change it again and can be something radically other. So what you get is something like the commodification of gender and the understanding of taking on a gender as a kind of consumerism and treating gender deliberately, as if it's an object out there, when my whole point was that the very formation of subjects, the very formation of persons, presupposes gender in a certain way, that gender is not to be chosen, and that performativity is not radical choice, and it's not voluntarism. Performativity has to do with repetition, very often the repetition of oppressive and painful gender norms. This is not freedom, but a question of how to walk the trap that one is inevitably in. Butler also writes that it seems to me that there is no easy way to know whether something is subversive. Subversiveness is not something that can be calculated. I do think that for a copy to be subversive or heterosexual hegemony, it has to both mime and displace its conventions. So this is what she expressed her discomfort about people complaining about the concept of gender. Now let me conclude in this way. So according to Judith Butler, the philosophical, psychological, and linguistic effects of heterosexuality on the higher pedestal led to suppression and kept its expression hidden. For decades, this chain of heterosexual ideas has gone unbroken because heterosexuality is dominant. The other sexes have no room to pursue their goals and cannot live their lives fully when they are not accepted as normal. Society as a whole may one day recognize these unspoken problems that undermine social authority. Now, on my personal note, I would say We all of us, we want to be recognized, accepted, and respected. And they do as well. So friends, the concept of gender is no longer foreign to us, at least those of us who are present in this seminar. If it is still foreign to us, or if it is still the case, do we still want to live in denial for the rest of our lives? Now, what is our attitude towards gender and transgender people? Now, I would conclude by saying, for the sake of humanity, we must reform and reshape our views and perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you, brother, for elaborately presenting the gender performative view of Judith Butler, and also for showing us how gender is socially constructed. And up next, the final presentation is by Brother Ernest Stalin and Brother Rins Padamattummal. Both are from philosopher students from Satyanilayam, Chennai. Their topic is transgenderism, identity, challenge, and questions. I request Brother Ernest to come on the dais. Handing over to you, brother.
So, once again, good morning, dear fathers, friends, and sisters. Happy to present our paper titled Transgenderism, Identity, Challenges, and Questions. So, the content of my presentation is the introduction, names and terms, gender identity, the queer theory, philosophical views, recognizing their identity, conclusion, and reference. And as we know that we live in a heteronormative society where only male and female identities are accepted and considered. Other than these two identities are considered queer. It's because of this identity crisis that transgenders are distanced from the society socially, economically, and politically. Here comes the struggle for gender identity. And in order to understand the real problem of transgenders and struggle for their identity, let's understand who they are. The etymology of transgender word, rooted from Latin word trans, means across or beyond. According to Susan, transgender literally means across gender or beyond gender. And according to Nicholas, today, transgender is defined today as an umbrella term with many different identities existing under it. According to Oxford Learner's Dictionary, the word transgender means describing or relating to people whose gender identity does not match the sex they were said to have at birth. And here I have given some of the identities which comes under the umbrella term of transgender. And we are aware of these terms like trans man, trans woman, intersex, gender non-conforming, and non-binary or genderqueer. And it is good to know that being a non-binary is not the same thing as being intersex, because intersex people have an anatomy or genes that do not fit typical definitions of male and female, and most intersex people identify as either men or women. And in case of non-binary individuals, they are usually born with bodies that may fit typical definitions of male and female, but their innate gender identity is something other than male and female. And we are well aware of the term gay and lesbian. Being a gay or lesbian is a matter of sexual orientation. As we know that gay is a term used for a male who is attracted to another male, and lesbian is a term used for a female who is attracted to another female. And here comes the gender identity. According to the University of Minnesota Transgender Commission, defines the term like this, I quote, "Gender identity is one's own internal sense of who they are, being a woman or man, girl or boy, or between or beyond the genders." I end quote. Of course, the postmodern understanding of gender identity is very inclusive and liberative. But it is the understanding of those who know the reality of people whom we call transgenders. But what about the popular notion of gender identity which guides the society at large? It's a big question mark for us. And let's understand the process of formation of popular notion of identity in the society. And we know that the idea of an identity forms from a society, family, culture, religion. From there, we get an idea, kind of horizon, a pre-understanding we get. From that understanding, we look at the world, right? As the words of Martin Heidegger, every understanding is grounded in pre-understanding. We look at the reality from our pre-understanding. And we do not look at as it is. And for example, I have given the example of Indian society. Indian society is a patriotic society where male child is celebrated, and it expects him to be courageous enough, bold enough to face all situations. And it also blocks him to not to express his own feelings, such as crying is a natural feeling. But the society does not allow him to express it. And here comes the queer theory. This is an academic tool for gender identity and sexual studies. This theory was proposed by Teresa de Laritas in 1991 from her work Queer Theory, Lesbian and Gay Studies. She put forth 3 important points that are refusing heterosexuality as the benchmark for sexual formation, and a challenge for the belief that the lesbian and gay studies is one single entity, and the last one would be a strong focus on the multiple ways that race shapes the sexual bias. And she also proposed that this theory could be represent all these critics together and make it possible to rethink everything about sexuality. And the idea of heteronormativity is prevalent in all the institution structures. The society is happy with the 2 gender concepts, either male or female. It is not accepted the 3rd gender concept. At the same time, the sexual orientation too, like lesbian or gay. And the heteronormativity is the idea that promotes heterosexuality as a normal and preferred sexual orientation. It also reinforced through the social norms and in the name of culture, tradition, and the marriage, employment, adoption rights, government policies, political and medical priorities. And it is a way, power, and control over the non-sexuals like lesbians and gay. And here comes the philosophical views. From the introduction to the second sex, Simone de Beauvoir states that while man sees himself as a human being, as something neutral, he sees woman as the sex. Because of this way of seeing and because of the power he has in man's hand, he has been able to assert his view as the absolute. He is a subject, he is the absolute, and she is the other. And from her words, we understand that how man is considered to be the absolute of his creation. He looks down his co-creation as the 2nd or the 3rd gender. And because of the history and other rules that are written by men for the men's society, she tells. And she also tells that the body is not a thing, it's a situation, it's a grasp on the world and a sketch for our project. And let's ask ourselves, like, as a man, what is that which identifies me as a man or woman? In other words, how far I'm sure about my gender identity? It may look a simple question to answer, like we can say our sexual orientation, sexual organs or other masculine or feminine characters that make me as a man or woman. But there are some men who are like, impotent, who cannot, unfortunately, cannot produce sperm. Or there are some women who are lost 1 or 2 organs, such as hand or legs or eyes. But still we call the man or woman. And the question remains same. How do you know that you are a man or woman? And here comes the gender identity and gender expression. What is sex? Sex is a biological factor that is female and male. And what is gender identity? Gender identity is how a person identifies him or herself, such as woman or man. And what is gender expression? It depends on the characteristics of a person, such as feminine or masculine. And in general, we have the understanding that man has to go outside for work and he has to be the breadwinner of the family. And wife has to take care of the family, like kids and so on. And this gender role is closely tied up with the gender expression. For example, a man by sex, he is a man, by his gender expression, he is a breadwinner of the family. We call him a man because he was born male and typically doing the work of man. Therefore, at work, his sex, gender identity, gender expression match well. So we call him a man. Whereas, if a man doing the work of his wife at home and he does not feel the difference that he is doing the work of a woman, his gender expression may be changed, but no way his sex or gender identity is changed or doubted. He is not conscious about his gender expression. For him, it is a part of his work of a day. In that case, can we call him a transgender? He may not think so, or we may not call him also. But in true sense, he is a transcending gender. We notice on the daily basis of life, gender expression changes from person to person and the type of work we do. Based on someone's gender expression, we cannot arrive at his sex or gender identity. But as a human being, we tend to assume by looking at how people express themselves. Like Kant phenomena, we do not know that thing that is, but from appearance that appears to our eyes, we come to the conclusion and we judge and we name them and we give them identity. Like parents, most of the time parents do not allow our children form their own gender identity. It's parents who decide who or what should buy for the boy, girl, what should buy for a boy or what should buy for a girl child. And in general, we attribute blue for boys and pink color for girls. We buy gun for boys and doll for girls. And what if we buy cricket bat for girls, and will she become a boy or will be confused? Sometimes for baby girls, the parents buy certain things until she grows in order to show that she is not a boy. Then how do we understand and answer the question on gender identity? It's much more than that. It depends on the toys that a boy prefers to play with it and the type of cloth that it attracts her to wear it. Sometimes it opposite also. The proof of what gender each person belongs to lies within the brain, says Nicholas. Consider transgender who is born with woman's genitals. The person is labeled as a female from his birth, but his internal sense is much oriented with masculine aspects and want to become a man, but the society never allowed him. It's quite natural that we do not understand and accept natural phenomena. But today, with all scientific understanding of these aspects, the preconceived false perception of gender has to be changed. Gender identity is in the mind, which means an aspect tied to the physical structure of brain. It's not something that could be learnt or unlearned. It's purely a biological aspect of a person. Of course, once we are able to understand the reality of one's own gender, that is easy for the society to change and accept it. And of course, it takes a real time to understand and make it others to understand the concepts of labeled gender and actual gender. And here I have given some of the references where our Indian constitutions given the equal rights to transgender community and recognize them as a third gender. Like National Legal Service Authority of Union India 2014 says that transgenders people as the third gender. And in the 11th 5-year plan project, which brought employment opportunity for transgenders people. And on 15th of April 2014, Justice K.S. Radhakrishnan tells that transgenders are also citizens of India and they must be provided equal opportunity to grow. And in contemporary Indian society, we find that they are included in census documentation, issuing of citizenship ID card, issuing of passports, social economic development, and constitutional safeguards for the transgenders people. And here I come to the conclusion that question on transgender identity is still debatable question in the society. Many transgenders people go through a lot of trauma problem in everyday life. And the mainstream of society has very least place for the cross-dresser or transgenders. And these are the people who have no owned houses and families, difficult to get even a rented houses or legal employment, who are marginalized by gender or sexuality, who have no face of identity in human society. And we would say that education is one of the most important tool for the transformation of the society, where the students will be taught to respect the transgenders, and they will be learned that how they also free to express their gender identity. And parents should teach the kids to respect the transgenders, and when they do all those things, then we can sure that it will develop a great future for the transgenders. And issue of transgender persons have gained an increased attention in the religious circles too. And so we know that the Catholic Church similarity visualize an inclusive church and an inclusive world where transgender issues are given predominant importance. And we have drawn inspiration from the Pope Francis, who says, "Who am I to judge? The same way, who are we to give identity to others?" Like for this project, I have interviewed a couple of transgenders. When I had a talk to them, when I addressed them, Akka, they were very happy, And most of the time, we, from third perspective, from outside, we look at them and name them, like you are a trans man, or you are this and that, trans man, trans woman. But, it is our responsibility to listen to them, what they want call them. It is not we name them, but what they want call them is important. Like if they want to call themselves Anna or Akka, who are we to give again name or identity? Let's call them. There comes change. Once personal conviction, personal change comes, then the society will change. And we are happy that earlier people used the pronoun it, which remained a subhuman level, like dog or cat. But now it has been grown, and people became aware that they call trans people as a trans man or trans woman. So there is a change. Of course, the phenomena that occurs on a small scale, but it has to be embraced by the society in larger scale, which leads to concrete change in the society that could be visualized in day-to-day lives. Thank you.
Thank you, brother, for correctly pointing out the challenges, identity crisis faced by transgender community. And up next, for the discussion, I request all the paper presenters to occupy the seats on the stage. Okay, those who want to ask questions, please raise your hands. The volunteers will come to you. Introduce yourself and ask questions. Yeah, Father.
Anyway, I'm going to set the ball roll as nobody is asking question. First of all, I want to thank and appreciate all the paper presenters for being a very focused, comprehensive, and meeting the time. That's a very important aspect. And all the moderator who has done a good job. Now, my question is directed to Savio. Of course, your paper was very comprehensive, brought all different perspectives. You brought perspectives from philosophy, science, social science, and so on. Before I raise the question, probably on comment, perhaps the word semi-scientific approach may not be very appropriate. It has a biased judgment against social sciences, as though they are not real science, they are half science, So maybe we had to rephrase. When you refer to social sciences, use the word semi-science or semi-scientific?
It was semi-empirical.
Not semi-scientific?
No.
Okay, all right. Then, with regard to the question, You see, when you touched upon science, the question that comes to our mind is whether there is a sense of identity that one gives to oneself or it is innate. When we speak about the debate, there is also a little bit of nuance there, because transgender, as we understand, is a very, very comprehensive term. It includes people about the identity they give to themselves, how would like to consider themselves. But are also some people who have the genitals of male and female. That's a very, very tricky scenario they are into. I mean, it is not that they want to give an identity to themselves in some way. It is not about how they feel in their mind about what they are, but even there is an external manifestation of a confused identity which they have to reckon with. And that's one group of people who they struggle probably a lot, in terms of this identity that they want to give to themselves, despite the fact they have no externally one sexual, appearance, but they have both in some way. How do we address their concerns, especially when you spoke about the new, there is a whole area when people are trying to see there is no essential identity. In that context, how do we address their struggle, this phenomenon of this group of people among the transgenders?
Thank you for that. Among people who have non-standard phenotypic expression, that is genitalia, you can distinguish two classes. One of them is what you would call intersex, that is people who have ambiguous primary and secondary sexual characteristics. And you can describe, you could call the other group as hermaphrodites. That is primarily people who have maybe Klinefelter syndrome, though they have both female and male genitals at the same time. The thing is, these people do not think of themselves, from the literature which I have gone through, these people do not consider themselves as part of the transgender community, nor do transgenders consider them as part of the transgender community. They are a distinct class by themselves. Some of them might have overlap among the transgenders, but they are considered a distinct class among themselves and are treated as a separate group, and they have their own way of looking at themselves. And some of them might go through surgery and live as one sex throughout their lives, or some of them might not. But there are people also who have, for example, there is a case of males who, because of a certain problem in their digestive tract ending in their bladder rather than normally, have genitalia which are at birth they are sort of non-standard, and so they need surgical correction immediately after birth. Traditionally, it was the practice to bring up such children as females, but it was found that when these children were told the truth, most of them preferred to grow up as males. So the literature makes a distinction between people with intersex issues, people with hermaphroditic issues, people with Klinefelter syndrome, and the main transgender community. So even though there may be an overlap between the two, they are not essentially the same population.
Yeah, thank you, brother. Yeah, front.
So thank you for the wonderful presentations. I think everyone has worked very hard, and the presentations were very good. I have been reflecting on this question now the last 2 days, and one thing that was coming to my mind was that we have a kind of the physical self and then the psychological self, but then the third thing that comes is the social self. The idea that we are that there is a tendency to to regularize and to make it a norm, in a society, that there should be a male and a female, and there's a reason for that. I feel there has to be an order in the society, and there has to be a kind of a harmony. And now, in a way, when we are discussing about this with the postmodern tendency to affirm freedom, each person's freedom, to be who they are, creates a kind of a, or it may seem to create a kind of a disorder, a kind of a disharmony. So how do we actually know? Is there a possible between, like, these are the two extremes I feel, an order and freedom of each person, and the order in society, which tries to regularize things as male, female, and to function in society, for reproduction and all those kind of things. So, is there a way to reconcile these two things, these two extremes of freedom and order? Maybe Savio or anyone can. Okay.
According to Judith Butler, she speaks mainly focused on this question, where we are discovering more gendered categories. We had LGBTQ, now we have LGBTQIA+. So it's now opening up, and it would be possible. It is for us to accept their own gender identity. That would be better, because she focused on that perspective. We are in a normative society where heterosexual is accepted, and she speaks that that is not the case, and we need to also look at other genders and to accept their own feelings and need to go on. And this balance may occur in future, or only if all try to accept the people gender identity.
Brother Stalin?
So, answering your question, Father, what I understand is, like you have put forth order and the freedom. See, is from my understanding. Order is from how order comes, like society or religion, something that gives order. This way you have to live. So it is from it depends on the culture and society. For example, freedom, it's I have freedom to get up at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock. I have freedom, right? But at the same time, can I say that I have freedom to beat this man? No. I have freedom, but my freedom should not harm the peace of the other person. He also has the freedom to express his own feeling, but I should respect him. My freedom does not harm this fellow. So that's what my view on this.
If I understand you right, Father, you are asking about the ability of balancing chaos and order, right? So, Canadian psychology professor who specializes in Jungian psychology, Dr. Jordan Peterson, he has spoken on this topic because he has got into trouble recently for his views on the gender pronoun debate, whereas he himself is a open and friendly person, and he has done shows with people from sexually divergent backgrounds. So what he says is that one thing that can form a basis for reconciling these views and for bringing some level of order in society would be for everybody to commit to open and civilized debate. Nothing should be, whatever views you hold, you should be willing to debate them. You should be willing to defend them. Because Simone de Beauvoir previously suggested the building of a strong self that is undetermined by perceptions. However, the modern idea of gender identity is something that is very vulnerable and fragile because others' perceptions can harm me. So what Professor John Peterson pointed out is, in no sphere of life is anyone granted a self-description that is beyond debate. Even if it is among friendships, you can describe yourself in some way, but your friend would contest it. In marriage, your husband and wife could have a particular self-idea, but their spouse could contest it. In society, we can have an idea of what we want, but the state could contest it. Or the state could have a particular idea of what it wants to be, but the individual can contest it. So this debate, this argumentative tradition, this contesting, and this open commitment to truths is a platform where reconciliation can happen. And so, in this case also, there should be an open commitment to truths from all sides. And there should be open debate.
Thank you, brother. Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you, dear presenters. Your presentation was thought-provoking. This question, because we are dealing this issue of transgender under different themes, philosophical and religious, especially with regard to synodality, and also science. We saw one paper on science. Now my question is, what is the most appropriate kind of field? Is it philosophy or science or a religious institution like church can have real impact on this issue, which makes groundbreaking changes regarding transgender issues that we are facing? So what would you think? So any panel member can answer. Thank you. Is it clear?
I suppose I understood your questions, but the way how we social science and other things can contribute to the transgender society and here we see also transgender is also main. I mean, we are taking as an issue, but we also another issue is popping up is LGBTQ, and you can see a lot of this community people even in Pune. So addressing them is also, I would say, we can also address in philosophical way or other, but we also need to understand their emotional point of view, because that is very important, I suggest, because when I met them, I cannot philosophize. I just need to accompany them. I need to feel with them, accompany them. Just accepting their own gender, you just travel with them. That would be the great change. And I think that would enlarge the love and peace among the communities. And science also will help in a way. Thank you.
Yeah, there is a question in the WhatsApp group. Transgenders are physically fit for working and earning money, still they are begging. Is it out of laziness or out of social construct? Anyone can answer. Am I clear? Okay.
The Hijra community in India is not completely identical with the transgender community worldwide, and it is a mistake to see them as such. First of all, not all Hijras consider themselves transgenders. Some of them consider themselves third genders. Some of them consider themselves males who have sacrificed their sexuality to their conception of God as an offering, and it is from that sacrificial offering that they derive their socially validated powers of blessing and cursing. So there are many transgenders who do not look very much like the Hijras or the Aravanis or many of those people, and so the rehabilitating people of that community, those communities, is a tricky issue which is being handled by various NGOs and religious organizations of various faiths. In Bombay and Pune, I think there is one Hindu organization called Amar Prem, which does a lot of work rehabilitating these Hijras. However, these two communities are not identical. There may be overlap between them. On the other hand, there is also a large non-overlapping section.
Just would like to add to that, whether they are lazy that they are not working. I won't say they are lazy. They are ready to work. But the question is, who is going to give them work, is the question. I have almost some 400 people in Visakhapatnam where I am working, and all of them want to work. But where can we give them job placement? Who is ready to give them job placement? Now we are running behind government organizations to provide a kind of job like sweeping or office work or something. We are ready to come, where they are ready to come and do it, but organizations are not ready to give them job placement. They are not lazy. They are ready to work, but no one is giving the job. And the second aspect of it is the hijra culture. They are different from the transgender community. It's a cultural identity given to the people, those who identify themselves as transgenders. And this particular group members are actually brainwashed, telling them that begging and sex work are their traditional occupations. So we have seen when brothers are speaking in the history that they were given very good positions in the society. Once all these kingdom things and are gone, they were on the roads. No one was giving them job, and they started with the begging and sex work. But in hijra culture, their naiks and leaders brainwash them, telling that our traditional occupation is begging and sex work. We can only survive by doing begging and sex work. So because of that, some of them are forced into these kind of things. But those who are little educated and getting to know about their identity and the importance of living a dignified life, they are coming out to work, but people are not ready to give them a job placement.
Yeah, last.
I'm happy to ask a question to you. I don't know how much it is relevant, but I would like to pose this question.
Yeah.
During the time of COVID time, there was a time where nobody is allowed to come out of the houses, and many are starving, and there is scarcity of things. During that time, what was the situation of these people who are completely dependent upon the begging and sex? Anyone can answer?
Yes, sister.
I would be able to answer this because brothers did their papers because of the presentation. They may not know the ground reality. As you rightly said, during the lockdown period, they really struggled a lot. Their income is based on their begging and sex work. Most of them depend on that kind of works. And they were not able to do both the things, and they were remaining at homes, and they struggled a lot. And in Visakhapatnam diocese, through our congregation, through Archdiocese, and through CRI, we have collected some funds and dry ration, and we have gone to the places where these transgender persons are there, and we have given them the ration and the things. And also there are people, like-minded people, where the transgenders are living. They understood the difficulties of transgender communities, and they themselves came forward and given them the ration and kind of things. And also the government asked all the transgender persons to open their bank accounts, where central government and state government have given some little minimum amount monthly for the transgender persons. But unfortunately, most of the transgender persons didn't have their bank account, because of which they couldn't avail that scheme of taking the amount. But those who have bank accounts have taken the amount and utilized it. But mostly NGOs, church organizations, especially Protestant church organizations, have come forward to help the people in during the lockdown time.
Yeah, thank you, sister. Yeah, Father.
I just want to make the debate a little bit thought-provoking and really becoming more debating by challenging the very idea of debate that Xavier had put forward. I'll put the context and the background against which we say. First of all, my observation is we know very little about transgenders and the difference between transgender, Hijra communities. When I say we, not just the philosophy students here, but the society at large. Most of us, because we are thinking from a heterosexual point of view all the time, and therefore very limited possibility of understanding even in a debate, because our rationality is constructed by our heterosexual makeup. We cannot deny that. The second factor I would also say is when we speak about the boundaries, I like the title for one reason, because the title is Beyond the Binaries. It doesn't say there is no boundary, but we have to transgress the boundary all the time. We can't have fixed boundaries for the simple reason, if we have a fixed boundary, we are going to deny many rights of many people. One of the things one would say, choice is one's right. And where do we draw the boundary of choice? Can we say your boundary of choice rests only with your food? Can we say it rests only with your choice of religion? Only with the choice of clothing? What about my identity? One might say that's my right as well. So when we say we have to have clear boundaries, we need to also be aware of the fact boundaries are necessary and helpful, but they need to be transgressed time and again. That is the way of going beyond that. That's the idea of transgression. And the idea of transgression is philosophically very valid position in my opinion. We need to transgress time and again, including law. Otherwise law becomes very, very legalistic. Law becomes too constrained kind of approach to life. In that sense, when you speak about debate, we also should be aware of the fact the debate comes from a very logocentric Western mindset. And when a debate, always a privileged position is likely to win, because they have got their own mental construct and the legal frame, rational framework of arguments, which they might win over easily these people who cannot even articulate the struggles that they go through. That is where, underlying the whole idea of debate over and again is highly debatable for me. Your response, Savio, to make it really little bit heated up. Thank you.
The concern that was expressed is that many advocacy organizations have a stated no debate policy, even when people are willing to debate them on a civilized basis and are willing to acknowledge their rights to live according to their identity. I would like to give one example of a civilized debate which did happen between Neil deGrasse Tyson and Ben Shapiro. They were discussing the issue of transgenders in sports. There many, like you talked about boundaries, many feminists feel that sex-based rights are being trumped by the gender identity narrative, like safe spaces for women, women-only spaces, or women-only activities where women can express themselves with full freedom. There is, on the other hand, another feminist critique that the social narrative of women as including kindness and niceness conditions women to be supportive and nurturing of everyone they meet, and they have done this to the transgenders also. And to some extent, certain transgender advocacy organizations have taken advantage of this and have hijacked the feminist narrative, is complained by a significant section of the feminist feminist movement. So getting back to that example of the debate which I was talking about, they were discussing transgenders in sports. So the way I brought this digression is to talk about sex-based rights and women-only spaces. There were many men who identified, there were people who were assigned male sex at birth, to use their terminology, who later identified as men, and even after hormone replacement therapy, even after surgically removing their testes and taking estrogen, and gaining a feminine body, they were still stronger, hardier than women in those sports and could easily outperform women in those sports. So this became a matter where various female athletes, sports persons felt that their achievements were being trivialized. Ben Shapiro suggested an interesting, Neil deGrasse Tyson, the scientist, he suggested an interesting idea. He said you could have sports categories depending on your biological makeup, depending on maybe your that is up for future clarification. But instead of having a male category or a female category, like in boxing you have weight categories, no? The bantam, mosquito weight, heavyweight, like that. He said you could categorize sports people on the basis of their genetics or on the basis of their hormonal levels, and that would lead to more fairness in the competition. So I would, that was my exhibit A. That is an exhibit on how civilized debate brings solutions. And yes, it is true that those who are in a non-privileged position find it difficult to articulate their views, but there is also something called reverse snobbery, where some person in an underprivileged position can leverage their underprivileged position to, in a very subtle way, exercise dominion over those who were so far in a privileged position. And that becomes the switch. Once it is flipped, it becomes a sudden reversal, and like Lord Acton, the famous Catholic philosopher, said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So unless there is debate, one side is going to have absolute power. It might have been the heteronormative side till now, but if things go as they are, it may quite easily be the other side in the next century or the next century or so, and that is not healthy for anyone. Therefore, it would still be the case that debate continues to be an argumentative tradition, continues to be a necessity for a healthy society.
Yeah, thank you, brother. Shall we have a final question? It is in the WhatsApp. In comparing with other countries, what rights that the transgender community lacks in India?
Yeah, answer to this question, I have mentioned in my presentation itself that recognizing transgender identities, considering identity is one of the important things that our Indian government identifies them. And 2014, I have mentioned that, and they also have access to all the fundamental rights like everybody has. And if you want, I can give some statistics. Like after that, I have notes there. They also they should not be discriminated by their gender identity or any other things. They also should be given equal rights. That's the stand of Indian government now.
Okay, thank you, brothers. Let us give the paper presenters a round of applause. I thank everyone for your active participation, and I am signing off, handing over the session to MC Christus.
Thank you, Sam Bremer, for moderating this session. Now, let us disperse for lunch break. The next session is at 2:30 p.m. It starts with a panel discussion, which would go till 2:55, and then we have a talk by Damini Sinha. She is a transgender guest speaker. So I request you all to come on time